getting a little bit better at this. Audio's on, picture's on, everything's working. Welcome to Misguided Kitchen, guys. I'm Alex, your host. Today, we're going to be cooking one of my favorite comfort meals because just outside that window behind the camera is a miserable downpour, and I'm very happy to be on the inside of the house rather than the outside of the house. You know, I find cooking is comforting in a lot of ways. It keeps me sane, it keeps me happy. I don't know, it just passes the time. And of course, when you have people around, it's just that much more fun. I'm alone today, as I am most afternoons now, but that's my problem, not your problem. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to talk to myself, and hopefully somebody jumps on the chat. If you're on the chat, if you're by some weird chance watching this, let me know you're here. It's a lot more fun to talk to somebody, albeit through a computer, than it is to just be in the house by myself. I've got the cat running around. We're going to make a lovely cup of chai right now. There we go. Now, rainy days for me typically mean less outdoor activity, these days at least. I don't get many groups that want to go out on adventures on days like today. Though Africa's finally open, I don't have a group signed up to go with me right now. So, stuck in California, stuck in the rain, stuck in this COVID hellhole. And I thought I would, cook a little comfort meal and just kind of feel relaxed. We're cooking pasta Bolognese, although we're going to switch out the pasta and do probably polenta. But that'll be later, and most likely I won't be streaming for that part, so I'll enjoy it without you guys. But I thought we'd go through kind of the steps to make the sauce part of it. Let me just get my tea action on here. Are we chai fans, not chai fans? I was recently made aware of how delicious chai actually is. There we go, fill that cup up. Anyway, I'm bored if you can't tell. Welcome to my kitchen. This is Misguided. Misguided, of course, is our main show that we run on typically Saturday nights, although the last month has been kind of strange. That's the main channel where we just kind of jump into whatever conservation issue we're thinking of at that time. This version of the show is basically just me fooling around in the kitchen, using ingredients that are local, seasonal, all that kind of jazz. It allows us to talk more about the sustainability side of conservation. Doing a little reading today because it's raining and what else is there to do but dream of being in Africa and dream of guiding a group. I can't wait to get my next group. I've got a group signed up for potentially September 2021. That's really exciting. More details on that as it comes. And if by some chance you're interested in going to South Africa or Tanzania or Botswana, Namibia, shoot me a message, let me know, and I'd be happy to either help you figure out the path to get there, or ideally I can set your trip up and I'll go as your guide and you can listen to this rambling in real time. Picked up a book called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. I think I've posted a little about it before, but it's by Boyd Vardy. The Vardy family owns Londolozi, which is a hoity-toity, really nice safari lodge in South Africa right outside of the Kruger, in the greater Kruger. Let me come around so you guys can see this. There we go. The art of the way the tracker sees is the way he can look at a thing he has seen 1,000 times and always see something new. I like that line. That's absolutely true. You know, when you guide regularly, you're often in the same kind of pattern, same rhythm, same general area over and over and over and over again. So, I don't know, your mind is just used to being in a very familiar surrounding constantly. But it takes a special eye to be able to go back into that landscape time and time again and just feel totally refreshed every time you're there. Because it's one thing to be familiar with a landscape, but it's another to know it so well that you recognize when new things are happening. And for me, when that moment clicks, when I've been in an area long enough, I just feel this like sense of goosebumps all over, and it makes me happy. I guess what I'm saying is it's really cold and wet outside, so I'm focusing on things that make me happy today. I also picked up a new book that I'm excited to get into here. It's called The Zookeepers' War, an incredible true story from the Cold War. By John W. Here we go. Monhaupt, translated by Shelley Frisch. Living in West Berlin in the 1960s often felt like living in a zoo. I could see that. Everyone packed together behind a wall with the world always watching. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, East Berlin and its zoo were spacious and lush. socialist utopias where everything was perfectly planned and rarely complicated. So basically, this book gets into the idea that a Soviet-funded zoo in the 60s had to have been a bizarre place, and kind of the ins and outs of what that world was like, and ultimately the impact that it's had long term. Anyway, as I said, we are making Bolognese sauce today. And when I first went off to university, like most people do, I was eating ramen a lot and pre-packed meals, going to the dining hall a lot. And the dining hall food was perfectly delicious, but the ramen got old after a while. So I think I kind of started to think to myself, it'd be nice to not eat this garbage constantly. And I miss my mom's cooking, because my mom is a fantastic cook. Both of all of my family are great cooks. It's always been a staple. It's something we enjoy doing. It's obviously it marks the holidays, but any time of year, just special. Like, man, a wet cold day like today makes me miss my Nona's minestrone soup. Oh, that was killer. And I've tried making it, but it's not the same. But I've since kind of fiddled around learning how to cook. I took, I guess you call it a YouTube course, where Gordon Ramsay has some videos out about learning to cook, knife skills, basic kitchen skills. And, once I got comfortable with that, I kind of baby stepped and started messing around in the kitchen a lot more. Till now I feel reasonably comfortable, and I really enjoy cooking. And when I'm in the bush, there's nothing quite like the magic of epic day of sightings and game viewing, and then coming back and cooking for your guests. I really, really actually enjoy that, because it's such a personal thing. I can't remember the Korean quote off the top of my head, but there's a Korean quote that says every chef has different flavored hands, or something to that effect. And it's so true, because each chef, as they cook for someone, there's a deeply personal connection that goes through that. But again, I'm trying to relate this somehow to wildlife and sustainability and conservation. So the way I do that is trying to source as many in-season local ingredients as possible. And Bolognese sauce is really straightforward. You need meat of some variety generally. You could do a vegetarian version, but that's not cool. So I up the ante here a little bit. We have access in this area to a few amazing butchers. I like to rotate around and spread the business love, but one of them likes to do exotic meats. And from what I can tell in the conversations I've had, their meats come from reputable places. So I was comfortable selecting that option for this particular recipe. We've got, and forgive me if I've put these meats too close together. I'm not a professional chef. I have no idea what I'm doing. But we've got wild boar here and elk here on the other side. I wanted to give this dish a real delicious, just gamey flavor to kind of remind me of being back in Africa and eating those wonderful meats like impala and kudu, wildebeest. I've even had zebra before. It's actually not bad if you can get past I would say here in America, the social faux pas, but it's a pretty tasty thing. Eland, oh my goodness, is a fantastic meat. I digress. I'm getting way off track here. The point is, I've got on the table here, I went ahead and just cut it up ahead of time. I've got onion, carrots, and I went with the traditional, well, visually the traditional orange carrot, but actually that's a recent arrival if you do the history on it. It was invented, come on, in Europe for a Danish, I think, emperor, I don't know, basically to impress some king somewhere. But carrots traditionally aren't orange, historically aren't orange. But I've got a variety here. I've got white carrot, purple carrot, which I think is kind of a modern, let's get weird and pretend that we know what we're doing thing. And then orange carrots, which we're familiar with. And then celery. These all came from a farm just down the road, which is kind of cool. I don't know, you can almost taste the surrounding area. Now the tomatoes, on the other hand, were an issue, because that's not a fruit, right? That's a fruit. Yeah, it's a fruit. That's in season right now. And I've become kind of a prude when it comes to this. I prefer the DOP, which I can never remember the acronym, but basically it means that they're certified tomatoes from Italy, and they do the whole 9 yards. And there's, I think, a noticeable flavor difference. So I went ahead and grabbed some of those. We got our can of tomatoes. We've got some milk. We've got tomato paste, which for me is a secret ingredient. My real secret ingredient, which I'm going to share with you guys in a bit, so stay tuned. You got to keep watching for that part. We've got white wine to add in here in a minute, some butter, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut up some lemon thyme and add that into this as it cooks. But altogether, this thing's going to be on the stove for darn near 4 hours, which is not going to be the length of this live stream. Although I think it'd be cool to try to go 4 hours. Maybe just toward the end of this, I'm sitting around reading out of the book and watching a thing bubble on the stove. Wouldn't that be kind of fun and cool? I don't know. You're the viewer. You tell me. All right. First thing you need is a pan, of course. I prefer cast iron for this kitchen in this range because we've got an all-electric range at our house, and I'm not a humongous fan of electric ranges, but I think cast iron helps kind of counteract that. So let's first get this up a little bit hotter. I've just got it simmering here in the back. We're going to go a little over medium heat. I'm going to go ahead and pull you guys closer. Go ahead and give me 2 seconds. All right, hugely suspenseful, I know. Waiting for this guy to heat up a little bit more. That's not quite hot enough. I want to see that a little bit of smoke coming off there. And I did cook something this morning, and I've elected to leave that in here, just kind of the trimmings of it, because I think it's going to add to the flavor of what I'm working on. All right, knob of butter in. Beauty. And basically the goal right now is we're going to brown the meat, right? Nice and simple. We're going to toss in some olive oil. There you go. There's really no way to screw this part of it up. Really, the whole recipe is hard to screw up, in my opinion. All right, that looks good. We're going to start with our wild boar. And I've pre-salted and peppered this, trying to keep things expedited. But basically seasoned to taste. That, you know, whatever you prefer, doesn't really matter. And of course, you don't have to use wild boar. Beef, sparingly, right? We had that discussion on Misguided the other night. Pork, sparingly. Chicken, you could do chicken, you could do turkey. That's very appropriate for this time of year. Again, I was just wanting to do kind of a gamier flavor, just a stronger, a little bit more of a kick to it. I think we're going to add in some spices that I typically wouldn't add, just to punch it up, because it's cold outside. Still nobody in the chat. Hopefully somebody sees that I'm live and joins me. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can go ahead and, if you want, check out on Mammals, which is a newer platform, about a year old now. A platform dedicated to really like live streaming, adventure live streaming, showing you the natural world, trying to connect people. I think it's really going to go places. So you can watch this on YouTube the way you're doing now. I always post stuff about a day later over there. Or you can watch it live and interact with me, and we can chit-chat with each other. We can swap recipes, whatever you want to do. I'm going to turn the heat up on this guy. All right. Go. I'm going to add a little bit more salt here. One tip I've learned over the years is season a little bit as you go, every layer. Build your flavor profile. Don't rely on everything at once. All right, now we're going to add in some elk. Great. Already, just the smell coming off this is fantastic. I'm probably poking it too much. Again, I'm not a chef. I don't know what I'm doing. But I know I enjoy food and I enjoy making food. All right, we're going to, actually, how about this? Ooh, I have an idea here. We're going to get rid of this guy. Super. That's a little bit better. All right. One pro tip. Clean as you go. Again, though, I'm not a pro, so I don't actually know what I'm doing. I'm making this up as I go. That's why the show's called Misguided. Really, all I know is stuff about animals and how to communicate and safely keep you alive in the bush. Beyond that, I'm pretty useless. All right, clean our cutting board off. There you go. Let's get you back on the action here. Then I always like to just give a little dollop here, come on, of olive oil on my cutting board. Help preserve the wood, keep a nice shine on it. There you go. Beauty. All right, this is smelling good, it's looking good, it's happily doing its thing. I went with about a pound of both the elk and the wild boar. So there's almost 2 pounds of meat here. I'm making this recipe a little bit bigger than I normally would so I can have it for 2 nights, me and my wife. So just keep that in mind. I think it makes a lot more sense sometimes to cook a bit in advance and just have things kind of ready to go. I don't see the point in cooking every single day if you don't have to. Now, in our region of California, elk used to be pretty plentiful. In fact, elk were plentiful across most of California, but are one of those animals that have been hunted out. From where I am now, you'd have to go 50 miles, 60 miles to find elk. They live in Point Reyes National Park, National Seashore, I should say. And that's a little ways over. They live out on a kind of a peninsula, and they're absolutely beautiful. I should head out there soon and see if I can watch them in the rut, because that should be going on right about now. Maybe try to do some elephant seal action while I'm out that way and everything. I don't know. If you're on mammals for whatever reason watching the show and just quiet, I know you're back there. Go ahead and just let me know. Is that something you'd want to see? Do you want me to head out to the coast and go on a elk, I don't want to say elk hunt, an elk safari, let's call it that, an elk and elephant seal safari. Maybe I will anyway, but hey, if you're out there, you let me know. I'm not sure if I could live stream it because I don't think there's signal out there, but I could go and film something and come back and show you guys on our Saturday night show. All right, brilliant. Okay, at this point, I'm going to grab a bowl. And I'm going to pull the meat off for a minute. I'm only grabbing a bowl because there's a lot and I don't want it to go everywhere. Great. All right, there you go. Back down. I can grab another little knob of butter. Toss that in. Let me know in the comments, what's your favorite recipe? Do you guys want to see me try something? I'd be happy to try really whatever. But you guys have to let me know what kind of content you want to see. maybe the whole idea of Misguided Kitchen is dumb and I should stop. Okay, we're going to start with snorting fire at me over here. Start with my onion. In. Great. All right, now I got it in here somewhere. At this point, I'm going to add oregano if I can find where I left it. Whoa. Ah, here we go. Add a little bit of oregano. This is just dried oregano. Dried herbs tend to have a little bit more fragrant and fragrant odor and kick to them than a fresh herb would. All right, we're going to try to caramelize these a little bit here. Just let them cook. Nice. This has got to be the most boring cooking show on the internet. But it's fine, don't worry about it. We're having fun, that's what counts, right? There you go. Great. Now we're going to go ahead and add our carrot and celery. And just a little knob of butter. At this point, we're also going to add a little bit of ground nutmeg. A little bit. This is all seasoned to taste. So obviously we like things differently. And we're going to add a tiny bit of chili flake. Kind of awaken this just a little bit. And a little bit of cayenne. Just a hair. A lot, or a little goes a long way here. Great. All right, now we're getting that nice brown kind of color to it all. I'm no chef, but I'm going to assume that's kind of what you're going for a little bit. Great. I find that one of my most comforting feelings is when you've been out in the bush all day, either on a walk or a drive, and you come back to your camp to that nice crackling fire, right? And someone's out there and they've set up the pochecos or the different cast iron implements that they're going to cook with that night, and they've got dinner just barely started. So you can come into camp, have a nice rinse off, maybe grab a cup of coffee, and just enjoy being together. As you watch that sun start to sink, you hear all the birds, the turtle doves going, the bishops in the summer building their nests, and the weavers. It's just a comforting feeling. All right. Looking good. We're going to go ahead and add our tomatoes in now. And as I said, I'm doing this double, so I'm going to add the entire can. Juice and all, because I want that in there. I want it to kind of come off. We're going to actually let this cook, like I said, for up to 4 hours, really. I'm a big fan of low and slow. I think that you often get a better product because it depends on, of course, what you're cooking, but it just sort of allows things to render and kind of fall apart and get really, really flavorful and tasty. Okay, we're going to add, whoops, not that one. We're going to add some oregano. Again, just a touch here, right? Kind of come around the sides. There you go. We'll fold that in, mix it in. We're going to do a little bit more cracked pepper. And then this time we're going to add a splash of garlic salt. Great. And then, as I said, my secret ingredient that I'm quite fond of, especially for Italian cooking, which I grew up in a family that made a lot of Italian food, is actually old coffee grounds. So we've got coffee pot just there. And I know it sounds weird. I know they're used. I know you're like, oh my God, what is he doing? But old coffee grounds, I think, make a wonderful secret ingredient. All right, here we go. We're going to just take a little sprinkle, add them right in. Not too much, though. That's the real kicker, is you can't use a lot of it or it gets really weird, even weirder than this already is, really fast. There you go. All right, we're going to turn the heat up for a minute here. Tomato paste. It's another kind of secret weapon, really concentrated. Squeeze about, I don't know, a third of that tube in there. Great, now it's nicely bubbling. That's what you want. We're going to come in and add white wine. Okay, so you can smell that wine perfuming the air. That's strong. We want to cook the alcohol out, of course. We don't, well, I guess boozy pasta would be fun, but we don't really want that right now. Making a mess here. Checking our comments. Still just me. All right. Well, hey, you guys are busy. See, I got, oops, just one little bit too big of a coffee ground in there. There you go. Get rid of that. All right, now some cream. We have half a pint here. Great. Now it's really soupy, but remember this is going to cook for 4 hours, so a lot of this is going to steam off. And what we're going to have at the end should be a nice thick, I'm going to post some photos of it so you guys can actually believe that this came together and we actually ate it. A thick kind of sauce, right? You should be able to see all the different parts of it in there. Those onions are going to really break down. Carrots are going to get nice and soft. I'm going to let this come back to a boil, and then I'm going to throw back in my elk and my wild boar. And then I'm going to turn the heat down to keep it at just a nice low simmer. But I want some steam to just continuously come off of it. And I'm going to come and stir it, fold it on itself periodically, not too often at all. Because really, when you get down to this part, you want to just leave it. Don't mess with it. Let it be, right? All right, that's looking good. Add back in our meat. I think this is actually gonna test the very limits of this pan. Oh boy, turn that heat down already. Yeah, I'm trying to go slow because right now there's a lot of liquid, but that's of course going to come down the longer it's cooking. So just trying to take it easy, take it slow, introduce this back in and not make a gigantic mess all over the range top here. That'd be much preferred. Whew, there you go. Great. All right, a little bit more meat to go here. Yeah, we did it. We didn't, well, shouldn't speak too soon, but we didn't spill it all over the countertop and the range top. This is borderline like an open-faced lasagna at this point. All right, there it is. That fills that thing up perfectly. Give me 2 seconds. There it is, not much to it. We're gonna let that thing cook for a while. I don't know, should we try to stay live for 4 hours? Oh my goodness, it's 1:30 now, that's a long time. I don't know if I have that much material. And if you're on YouTube, I think it's safe to say this is probably the most boring video on YouTube, but that's just fine. I'm content to be that guy. A little bit of spilling. It's fine, don't worry about it. All right, well, I don't know what else to do, really. I mean, we've got that on the stove. It's gonna just jam and do its thing. Got a great color. We're gonna post a photo of it later. I've got some chai. Life is good. I guess you don't have any questions because there's nobody in the comment bar, but that's just fine. You know what? Hey, I'm content to talk to myself. I do it professionally all the time. I'm kind of reluctant to stay on live for 4 hours. I think that's a waste of everybody's time, and it'd be a hell of a file to upload to YouTube later on. Thankfully, Mammals keeps them all in there for me, and I don't have to worry about that part. This book, let's take 2 seconds here. Let's kind of just peruse the beginning of it. I don't know about you. I usually skip prologues. Where's the first page? Here we go. Where's the first chapter? War and crocodile tail soup. Jesus. We're starting off so ominous. War and crocodile tail soup. There would surely be no more bombs that day. In the early evening, fog had settled in, and now thick clouds veiled the sky over Berlin. How could enemy pilots possibly locate their targets in this weather? The zoological garden was dark and quiet, the visitors were long gone, and the gates were shut. It was November 22nd, 1943. Hey, it's darn close. What is it, the 17th today? It was November 22nd, 1943. Over the past few months, Royal Air Force raids on Berlin had been stepped up, But apart from 6 hits 2 years earlier, the zoo had thus far emerged largely unscathed. Even so, Lutz Heck was prepared. The director held repeated drills to teach his staff what to do if firebombs hit. He also readied for the possibility of animals escaping by buying 2 elephant guns, 11 mm caliber. This is a serious gun, Jesus. In some other zoos, predators had been shot dead as a precaution. That's okay. Oh boy. These guns allowed Heck to avoid such drastic preemptive measures, at least for now. Heck, who had been a supporting member of the SS since 1933 and a member of the Nazi Party since 1937, was a close friend of Hermann Göring, Germany's Reichsmaster of the Hunt. I've never even heard of what that is. Göring, second in command in the Third Reich, always kept a pet lion cub brought to him by Heck and at his country residence, Carenhall, in the Schaffenside forest outside Berlin. When the cub grew too large and dangerous to live in a private home, Heck arranged for it to be picked up and promptly supplied Göring with a replacement. So this is a case example here, a textbook case example of why big cats are not good pets. Never. If you're one of these people and you're watching this stream, just get out now. I don't want you on this channel. There is no point, 0 point, to having a big cat, a tiger, a lion, a leopard, jaguar, whatever, even a cheetah, right? 0 point to it. They don't make pets. That's why we domesticated animals. One of the reasons we first asked them to work and then later realized we could just have cute things wandering around the house. But lions are not among those, and I'm not willing to debate it. I'm going to just shut that off there. Among zoologists, Heck was a controversial figure. Together with his brother, Heinz, the director of the Hellbrunn Zoo in Munich, he bred back Arx, an extinct species of European cattle, by crossbreeding various domestic cows until the young animal bore a resemblance to the wild form. This is what's so bizarre about that whole era, because the other night I was watching the David Attenborough news special, and he really takes time to point out his privilege, being that his career began in the 1950s, really, and he got to see the world as very few people will ever get to see it again, and he got to see more of the world than very few other people of his time got to see. Why did that relate? Breeding. Where were we here? Resemblance to the wild form. Why did that relate? I think what I was trying to say is that some people are questioning now with science, could we breed back, yeah, this is what I meant. Could we bring back species that have been extinct by genetically creating them in a lab? Like, I've heard this case for the mammoth a few times, saber-toothed tiger. I mean, animals that haven't been around for a while. I am not in favor of that. I think it's weird. I don't think it relates to the preservation of our planet. It's like looking backwards and trying to walk forwards. It's not going to work. And Attenborough points out that in his era, when he got started at my age, really, when he was, mid-20s, late 20s, the adults of his era were really focused on natural history. So the idea that you could just sort of collect stories of animals from around the world and call that good enough. And people in that era didn't really consider the impacts that this might have down the road. We're getting a phone call here. Hold on. We're going to just say decline to that one. I can do that now. Anyway, I'm getting a bit on a soapbox. Let's just get back into the story. Many colleagues criticized this backbreeding effort as unscientific. Well, hey, there you go. But Lutz Heck knew he could quickly silence his adversaries by threatening them with the Reichsmaster of the Hunt. Okay. Göring was keen on promoting breeding projects in hopes of creating new, extraordinary hunting trophies. In 1938, he appointed Lutz Heck head of nature conservation in the Reich Forestry Office. And on April 20th of the same year, the Fuhrer's birthday, because we need to remember that, he was granted the title of honorary professor. That's always been a goal of mine, to become a professor and work at a university and peachy keen life, right? Several years earlier, Goring had been even rewarded Heck with a substantial expansion of the premises north of the Berlin Zoo, where a special German zoo, ooh, that's dark, was being established. From black grouses to beavers to brown bears, only animals from within the Reich were on display. That's a fucking boring zoo. Jesus Christ, are you? Holy cow, I just got to process this. That'd be like creating a park and only filling it with antelope, just holy cow. Or like, yeah, we're only going to do a park of black-footed boobies or blue-footed boobies. Um, only birds of paradise. I mean, it just. Oh. Oak trees bordered the enclosures, and the animal identification signs were emblazoned with little swastikas. Isn't that cute? Heck had been the director of the Berlin Zoo since 1931. Founded in 1844, wow, that's pretty early. It was Germany's oldest, and with more than 4,000 animals from 1,400 species, the most biodiverse in the world. The zoo was owned by an association of shareholders with, well, hey, hold on. Founded in 1844, it was Germany's oldest, and with more than 4,000 animals from 1,400 species, the most biodiverse in the world. I'll go ahead and get out on a limb here. So, in fact, Misguided, last Saturday we talked about this. And if you haven't seen that video, if you're on mammals, you can go to my habitat and you can go into the playlist. I've got all the Misguided episodes there. If you're on YouTube, it's chronicled somewhere in my video catalog. It's one of the more recent uploads if you're watching in November or December of 2020. But currently, in the American zoo system, in the AZA, there's around 6,000 species represented. And I made a point of trying to outline that if we look at the European Zoo Association, which I think is IWASA or WASA, I can't remember the acronym. Doesn't matter. The number is relatively the same. If you compare that to the amount of species known to exist on the planet right now, is roughly 8.7 million. That means that when you go to the zoo, you're seeing roughly 0.06% of life on planet Earth. But I will go so far as to say that in the 1840s, the whole concept of a zoo is a new thing. And in those eras, I think they were referred to as a menagerie most of the time instead of a zoo. I think zoo came a little bit later. But if we consider that modern zoos here in 2020 maybe have 6,000 species represented, like in this country, across the whole of America, saying that one zoo had 1,400 species, that's actually pretty progressive in terms of trying to represent biodiversity. Because, of course, in the 1840s, we didn't know that there was 8.7 million species. We were just barely coming out with the idea of taxonomic orders and everything. But that's progressive for its era. I'm sure that the conditions the animals were housed in were questionable and challenging. And I'd also be curious to actually get a list of what these species are and see how in today's vision we've changed, maybe undoubtedly we've recategorized some of these. Nonetheless, kind of impressive for the 1840s. In lieu of receiving monetary payments, shareholders and their families were granted free entrance. Okay, so the zoo belonged to its visitors, at least to those who could afford to buy stock or are lucky enough to inherit it. Okay, so it's not really for the public, it's for rich people. Let's go ahead and say it, just rich white people. Lutz Heck took over his post from his father, Privy Councillor Ludwig Heck, who had made the zoo famous, liked to brag that he had been a national socialist before the term even existed. His son ran the zoo in complete accord with Nazi guidelines. In July of 1938, Jewish shareholders were required to sell their shares back to the zoo. Oh, that generally far below their fair value, of course, and the zoo then resold them at a higher price. Gosh, just straight up racism. There's no other phrase for it. By the end of the year, Jews were no longer allowed to visit. I got to process that for a second. This is a weird topic to be on a nature show, on a nature platform, but I don't understand at all why people are so mean. You know what I'm saying? I've certainly read a lot about World War II, and I've seen a lot of films about World War II, and I just can't understand where they're coming from or what their point is even um, in these things that they do to other people. You know, there's an elitism, of course. I mean, maybe America's going through its own version of it right now. It's fear. People are being told that they are missing something from their life, something that wasn't even really there to begin with. But a politician is telling them that you don't have this, and I'm here to give it to you, and I'm also here to protect you from these people who are trying to take it away, even though it's all fabricated, you know? The last 100 years, especially, we have collectively wasted so much time as a species, as a human species. We have wasted so much time squabbling with each other and arguing with each other and fighting these stupid, pointless wars that solve nothing. They've advanced our technology. I mean, that's probably the only upside to war that you could really argue for, is that technology goes through just an accelerated marathon. I mean, look at World War II. We started fighting it with propeller planes, and giant bombers were invented very early on, partway through. And then by the end of the war, they're shooting the first long-range missiles and using jet airplanes to fight. I mean, the advancements, that's maybe the only upside, but those can also happen in peacetime. There's just not as much pressure to force it. Although you could play devil's advocate to me and say that, well, you know, you look at SpaceX, Elon Musk, that whole thing, he's pushing the game. Right now, I'm in no rush to go buy an electric car. Um, and I feel a little guilty, but also the thought is, well, we don't have the infrastructure to support electric cars quite yet. It's coming, but not quite yet. We're still too reliant on other things. Combined with charging the electric car often uses fossil fuels anyway. It's just you don't have to look directly at it, so you can feel a little bit more justified. So that infrastructure needs to change. But still, someone like Tesla, a group like that, is pushing the boundaries of what we used to think was possible. Apple did it with, I mean, heck, I'm using Apple devices here to stream this and eventually upload it to the internet, where who knows where it's going to go. And some of you are going to love this, others are going to hate it. This video could go nowhere. It could go viral. I mean, we live in an incredible era. And we have the privilege to look back on history and kind of ponder, what was it all for? What was it all for? We've spent the better part of 100 years hating each other, fighting with each other, and ultimately have done nothing. Half of our rainforests are gone. Biodiversity is taking a shit and dumping. Our planet is screaming for help, and it's as if we can't hear it. And you could take the callous approach of saying, well, the Earth has always reinvented itself. It's always come back in its own way. Sure, but the Holocene, where we live, is the longest period of stability ever observed by science through Earth's history. Do you really want to be the one at the helm of changing that? Sure, some things are natural, but a lot of things are caused by what we get up to. I'm getting a little too philosophical now. Forgive me. Let's get back to the Zookeepers' war. Heck had attempted to get himself put in charge of all German zoos, so he wants to be the zoo chief. The Nazis felt this would exceed the reasonable number of posts for him to hold, however, so permission was denied. Even so, the Heck family's close ties to the party proved advantageous for the country's other zoos, especially after the outbreak of World War II. In times of war, there were often problems with animals' feed supplies, which Lutz Heck was generally able to rectify quickly, unlike in World War I, when many zoo animals had starved to death. but it was his own Berlin Zoo that would reap the most direct profits from the war. Heck used forced laborers, and the Russian campaign enabled him to bring animals over from Eastern European zoos. Wow. But by November 1943, the days of expansion were done. The war had long since come home. Heck saw one question written all over the faces of his zookeepers as they tended to their animals. Will we get out of here alive? It's a question most modern zookeepers never have to ask. He had taken the precaution of evacuating part of the zoo's collection, 750 animals from 250 species, to other cities. The Tasmanian devil went to Frankfurt, a giraffe went to Vienna, garpikes from the aquarium to Leipzig, and wild donkeys and lions to Breslau. To protect those that remained, Heck had steel boxes with slits built into the ground and covered with earth. They looked like oversized molehills. The caretakers were told to stay in these shelters until danger passed. An underground air raid shelter was also built at the entrance to nearby Budapester Strasse. A flak tower nicknamed Gustav had been given to him as a a flak tower nicknamed Gustav had begun to give him a queasy feeling. Okay. The reinforced concrete colossus sat enthroned on the northwest border of the zoo, like a medieval fortress. The tower was intended to provide refuge to soldiers and civilians during air raids, but Heck feared it was far too easy target for the British and American bombers. Will we get out of here alive? Was a question Heck was now pondering as well. It seemed that at least this mid-war Monday would end without any major incident. In a staff apartment at the edge of the zoo, several caretakers were celebrating the birthday of a colleague with a few bottles of beer. Beyond the zoo's walls, people were, as usual, seeking distraction from the everyday wartime routine. Many headed to the opera, paying no attention to the instructions on the program for what to do in case of an air raid. Others went to one of the nearby movie theaters, to see one of the new color films, with the ever-popular Hans Albers flying around through the air on a cannonball, or Melody of a Great City, which people would later say was the last film to show an as-yet undestroyed Berlin in all its glory. But on this foggy November evening in 1943, no one could have anticipated that. At 7:25 p.m., the telephone in the zoo's gatehouse rang. The message was from Air Raid Warning Headquarters. Strong combat units approaching from Hanover, heading east. Several waves to follow. The gatekeeper rushed to pass along the news. Within a few minutes, all sections of the zoo had been informed. The caretakers sent their wives and children to the air raid shelter, which could hold about 20,000 people on 5 levels, and then moved into their molehills. Nothing much will happen tonight, they assured one another. In this foggy weather, impossible. Half an hour later, the first airplanes reached the city. Over the next 20 minutes, 753 British bombers dropped 2,500 tons of explosives. 21 major fires raged in the zoo that night. The roof of the elephant pagoda caved in, killing a white rhinoceros and 7 elephants. One was buried under a roof beam, his entrails hanging out of his belly, thick as rolled-up mattresses. Siam, the male elephant, was the only survivor. I'm going to assume he was an Asian elephant. One of the 2,000 animals that had remained in the zoo, 700 were dead. Oh, hold on. Of the 2,000 animals that had remained in the zoo, 700 were dead. The next day, the worn-out caretakers, their faces blackened with soot, joined up with a group of prisoners of war and went about cleaning up. They put out fires and cleared away debris, under which they kept finding dead animals. The following night brought renewed attacks, which devastated the neighborhoods and devastated nearby neighborhoods. Once the raids were over, the zookeepers pushed out of their hideouts to put out more flames. The bombs had destroyed many of the city's water pipes, making it necessary to transport water in vats and buckets. Everyone pitched in. Katharina, the wife of the aquarium director, stood in front of the red-bricked hippopotamus house with a relatively intact hose and tried to quench the flames of the burning roof. Next to her, the hippos circled nervously in their outdoor tank with terrified, wide-eyed stares. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near a freaked out hippo. Jesus fuck, holy cow. 1 year old, their child would not budge from his surrogate mother's side. Let's see here. Rubble woman with a PhD. So we're moving on to another section. Just kind of processing the chaos. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe if you're watching this far, undoubtedly you have nothing better to do. So thank you. Hey, we're hanging out together because either you're watching this live and not commenting, or you're watching this after it's aired and rebroadcast. And I'm not directly communicating, but I'm still curious. Throw in a comment below. Let me know, what do you think of zoos? Because I have a really complicated history with zoos and a really complicated way of approaching them. I don't know. I question their integrity, as I think you should. You should question any institution's integrity to assure that they're following ethics. But I always will stand by that far and away experiencing wildlife in the wild, seeing a hippo in the wild is infinitely better than seeing a hippo in a red brick building or whatever contrived habitat they've set up at whatever zoo that you're visiting. Tell me I'm wrong. It's easier, of course, for people to see wildlife if it's at a zoo. You know, let's just throw a dart. If you live in New York City, it's a lot easier to go to that zoo and, you know, be in that area because that's part of your landscape, you know? It's your one chance to maybe escape the jungle that you live in, the urban jungle, and see some wildlife from another part of the world. And I don't know, maybe you come from an underprivileged family and there's just no funds to be able to send you to a wild place. I see that as an inherent issue, and I think we are indebted as a society to find ways to connect people with wild places. People, places, wildlife. That's my unofficial motto and my unofficial goal. As I've said maybe a few times, certainly I think on today's show, I run a little group that arranges private safaris to mostly South Africa with a buddy of mine. And I would love to find a way to fund, and I'm just not a shrewd enough businessman to make this happen. How could I fund a project? And this of course has to be post-COVID, where I can take people from all walks of life, but especially young people. And by young people, I mean, I want to take kids between the age of 15 and 20 on trips to the bush to see wildlife. I want them to experience it. And more importantly, I want to be able to take them to places where they can experience conservation firsthand, because until you've seen animals in the bush that have been poached or mutilated in some capacity, it's a challenge to understand what's happening. Watching the new David Attenborough film, I couldn't help but think to myself, man, wouldn't it have been cool if he could take people to go see some of what's happening? That very famous clip now of the walruses tumbling off the cliff. Very powerful, and undoubtedly was a challenge to film. But if you could take people to be in that area and see that firsthand regularly, getting as many people as you can out to these places as often as possible, I believe you could instill change that's going to last the rest of their life. Because once you've seen something to that magnitude, it's a challenge to unsee it or unremember it. Memories like that last your lifetime. And maybe, just maybe, when we send these people home, they'll consider a little bit more that their actions have impacts and look around their own home. Maybe these projects, these field trips would have to be supplemented with at-home work to see conservation issues where you live, because everywhere on the globe has something it could do better for conservation. That's a pervasive issue, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe I'm weird, maybe I'm rambling. I know I'm rambling. What do you think? Seriously, I want to know. Either direct message me, drop a comment, give me something. Let me know you're out there. We're all stuck in this COVID hellhole together, so the very least we can do is communicate. I'm still processing that book as I'm stirring this Bolognese sauce. Let's give it a little taste, see what we're dealing with. I think it needs more garlic. Fortunately, I have some powdered garlic here. Okay. Let's get back to it. Where were we? Rubble woman with a PhD. Katrina was born in Breslau, near the Polish border, in 1897. She was the second wife of the aquarium director. Both she and Oscar Heinrich, the aquarium director, were already divorced when she began working as his secretary in 1932, helping him type the manuscript of his book, The Birds of Central Europe. Even though Oscar had a key role in building the Berlin Aquarium and leading it to world renown, he was first and foremost an ornithologist. Their work soon brought them closer, and they married the following year. On the rooftop terrace of their apartment above the aquarium, they kept carrier pigeons and together studied their sense of direction. Katrina had remarkable credentials herself. At the age of 22, she had enrolled in a PhD course in zoology, botany, paleontology, geology, and geography at the University of Breslau, despite the dismal job prospects for a young woman looking to go into those fields. She collected 4 marriage proposals before graduation, almost as many as she did areas of academic interest. Quite the woman. And her dissertation advisor often worried that with all the time she spent going through men, as he called it, she would not have enough time to devote to her studies. So this book is getting into racism and sexism now. Great. But after 4 years, she became the first woman to receive a doctorate at the university's Zoological Institute. Well, that's pretty good, though, because typically a PhD is going to take in the neighborhood of 8 years. In the 2 decades since graduation, she'd spent her nights conducting research on bees and springtails, invertebrates less than a quarter of an inch long. During the day, she earned a living as a secretary, librarian, or administrative assistant. That was as far as a woman could go at the time. Sad. While Katrina put out the fire at the hippopotamus house, rumors circulated through Berlin that animals had escaped from the zoo. That always happens. Anytime there's a natural disaster, that happens. Elephants were said to be making their way across to Berlin's main thoroughfare, and lions were roaming about the ruins of the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church. A tiger reportedly made it all the way to the bustling, excuse my German, Potsdamer Platz, ate a piece of a traditional honey-glazed bee sting cake in the bomb-gutted Café Justi, and promptly died for reasons unknown. But the animals who survived the inferno were too scared to flee. They cowered in the ruins. Even the vultures and eagles did not fly away, but remained on the branches of their shattered cages. That's Stockholm Syndrome there. A tapir, a tropical relative to the rhinoceros, but pig-like in appearance, pressed up against the bars of its enclosure to draw warmth from some smoldering carbon piled in front of it. A crocodile was found lying at the entrance to the aquarium on Budapester Strasse. The force of the explosions had hurled it out of the tropical hull, and the night frost had been the death of it. Since the meat was kept fresh by the cold, the following days brought crocodile tail soup for the famished zoo staff, who were grateful for the added bit of meat. Meanwhile, the air raids were kept escalating. During the day, the Americans bombed Berlin. At night, the British took over. And this is something I've never actually considered, because, like I said, I've read quite a bit about World War II. I've seen quite a few films about World War II. I've never considered this. You know what? They made that film, The Monuments Men, some years back. This would make an interesting film. The folks that kept, the zoo somewhat stable through catastrophe. I'd be interested to at least see this, because it'd be a challenging film to put together and make, and you'd have to confront a lot of heavy issues, and I don't know, because that film ultimately would be packed with racism, sexism, sketchy wildlife ethics, Nazism, among other things. Meanwhile, the air raids kept escalating. During the day, the Americans bombed Berlin. At night, the British took over. And every day, the Red Army moved closer and closer to the capital from the east. So it went for 18 months until where we were here. So it went for 18 months until just before Easter of 1945, when Oscar was slowly recovering from a bout of pneumonia. All the time spent in the cold air raid shelter had taken a terrible toll on the 74-year-old aquarium director. He was getting an injection to help him back on his feet when the nurse accidentally hit a nerve and paralyzed his right leg. Ooh, boy. Katrina, who for so many years had supported her husband in his research, now added nurse to her responsibilities. Boy, Katrina is quite the woman. Breaking barriers, achieving goals. And it seems that she's doing it all without complaining. Which, I don't... By that I mean she's silently bearing the struggle that she finds herself in. I wonder how she vented and how she coped. Because undoubtedly she was aware of these issues. Let's keep reading. When he developed a nutritional edema, she asked Lutz, I think we skipped a section. No, we were good. When he developed a nutritional edema, she asked Lutz Heck for a daily ration of goat milk, but food was scarce and the zoo director had never liked Heinrich's pigeon research, much less his contacts with Jewish and dissident scientists. The conversation quickly turned ugly, dredging up old resentments. Herr Heinrich would have been better off sticking to his own job at the aquarium, Heck said sharply. In the future, I'll be sure that everyone's research agenda is prearranged. In that case, you can forget about any discoveries, Katrina snapped back, restraint having never been one of her strong points. No work of genius has ever come out of civil service. Yep. They argued back and forth for quite some time until Heck gave in and authorized the goat milk for her husband. I'd never fought with anyone for so long, he said, impressed. He wasn't used to being contradicted, let alone by a woman. Ooh. Jeez. Trenches in the zoo. New section. By late April, it was evident that the future Lutz Heck alluded to was not to be. Some obstinate souls who still believed in the possibility of a German victory attempted to keep the advancing Red Army at bay with anti-aircraft guns. The huge flak tower in which these guns were housed was an obvious target, and many of the shots fired in its direction exploded in the adjoining zoo. Heck arranged for his wife and sons to be evacuated and sent west. Katrina was also trying to figure out how to get herself and her husband to safety, but Oscar could no longer walk, and even if he could have fled, it would have not have occurred to him to leave the zoo, especially his aquarium, which he had run for more than 30 years. Let's stay here, he said to her quietly. I'd rather go down with everything. Well, he's committed to his work. In the final days of April, the Eastern Front ran right through the zoo. Several Soviet tanks had already battled their way to its walls. The remaining zookeepers were conscripted into the German National Militia and had to dig trenches on zoo grounds. During lulls in combat, they tended to the few animals that remained. By the evening of April 30th, it was clear, just a matter of time until the Red Army attacked the zoo. Lutzak bolted before they could. He sensed what lay ahead of him. The Russians had been told he'd seized animals from Eastern European zoos and abducted a team of wild horses from the Ukraine. With barely any working vehicles left in Berlin, he fled on a bicycle and succeeded in making his way to Leipzig, more than 100 miles, where he rode to the home of zoo director Karl Marx Schneider. Schneider was surprised to open his door and see who was standing in front of his home. "As a fellow zookeeper, I'm asking you to put me up for the night," Heck said without further explanation. 58-year-old Schneider had lost his leg power while serving as a lieutenant in World War I. An old social democrat, he'd refused to join the Nazi Party until 1938, when he succumbed to pressure from on high. As he cast a skeptical eye on Heck before reaching into his pants pocket to pull out a keyring, "Here's the key to my apartment," he said, "but I will not spend the night under a roof with you. When I return tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, you'll be gone." Schneider left and spent the night with friends. When he returned the next day, Heck had vanished. He'd stayed hidden for quite some time. Smoke lay over Berlin. When the dull thuds of explosions had at last gone silent, the grounds of the zoo had been reduced to rubble. The stone elephants sat at the Budapeststrasse entrance like silent sentinels, the gateway they'd watched over destroyed, apart from a narrow, crumbling arc somehow still balanced between two shattered pillars. The Antelope House, originally built in the Moorish style, was now just a pile of debris with two minarets and a chimney sticking out. A young horse poked around for a trace of grass between heaped-up bricks, while an emancipated wolf gazed over from his enclosure, hungry but too weak to chase after it. Once Director Heck had fled, Katrina took charge, tending to injured Berliners in the zoo's air raid shelter, her dying husband among them. She had attached a white cloth to a red cross to the door of the bunker in the hope the Russians would spare them from combat operations. From his sickbed, Oscar instructed her how to treat gunshot wounds and apply dressings. A few hours later, the Red Army soldiers entered the zoo. Oscar asked his wife for one last favor. "The poison pills," he whispered. "Get them for me." But the pills were in a drawer in Oscar's study in the demolished apartment. How was she supposed to get there? The place was swarming with soldiers, and besides, she had no intention of leaving her husband alone. So she tried to reassure him, telling him gently, "We'll get through this somehow." He sighed in disappointment. The next morning, the soldiers herded everyone out of their air raid shelter. Katrina was able to carry her husband to a dry, quiet corner in the basement of the aquarium, but they were unable to stay hidden for long. As the days dragged on, different sets of soldiers made their way past the smashed walls on the search for something to eat or drink, or just an opportunity to show the Germans who was now in charge. Men who did not obey or tried to protect their wives were shot, and their wives raped. Several times, Heinrich and her husband moved from one level of the ruin to another, but they were found again and again. The soldiers found them, and the men held Katrina down and raped her. This is getting dark. Finally, she was able to get her husband out of the aquarium. He was too ill to stand on his own. So she sat him in a wheelbarrow and went looking for a new hideout. I'm curious here, and I've got you guys with me, so give me 2 seconds. I just need to find her last name. Just curious to see who we're talking about here. Because reading is wonderful because your mind creates an image, but I'm just curious, who are these people? Oh, here she is, later in life. Okay, I'm going to try to show you guys. Ooh, can I do this all in real time? This is cool. All right, we're going to go in here. Then we're going to go, just 2 seconds. I know, especially on YouTube, this is painful, I know, but I appreciate it if you're actually watching and not just immediately jumping out of the stream. Okay. So we're going to go here. We're going to say, let's show you an image. Beautiful. Image, whatever, titles, whatever it wants to be. Then, there we go. Bam. Bam. So far, so good. Where did she go? There she is. Okay. Great. Whoops, I'm on the wrong. No, I don't want to delete that. Yes, I'm sure. What view am I in here? I'm in that one. No. Well, this is now not quite what I thought it was. Nonetheless, thank you. Ah, there it is. Okay. We're good now. We're good now. Don't worry about it. Here it comes. Here it comes. You ready? Look how slick this is going to be. Okay, so she's going to appear right. Bam, there. That's who we're talking about. That image is supplied through Getty Images. I don't own it. Whatever. I'm just going to put it up. Once the Soviet troops had left the zoo, Katrina went back to her old apartment and put a room in some semblance of order. Then, with the help of 2 zookeepers, she brought her husband back home. Oscar died on May 31st. Katrina was now alone. She asked the zoo's carpenter to make a coffin out of doors from bombed-out buildings and had her husband cremated. Several weeks went by before she could bury him on the zoo grounds. Now she had to go on, and Katrina recalled the motto of her dissertation advisor in Breslau: "Doing something will make you feel better." That's not bad, actually. Doing something will make you feel better. She had always abided by the saying, and it helped her to cope with the dark times in her life. Let me just kind of stir this. It's coming together nicely now. That sauce is thickening up. Meat's really getting just fall aparty. And it's only been going for, I don't know, better part of 45 minutes? Maybe, if that. Okay, nice. There it is. I'm going to give it another little taste here. It's really important to taste what you cook as you cook it. Yeah, it's got some flavor. I'm going to add some herbs to it later on, though. Garlic helped a lot. It almost needs a little more oregano. And definitely some thyme. All right, let's do that now. Let's do that now. I'm also, hey, what the hell? I'm going to throw in pinch or two here of tarragon just to be extra fancy. I need something to lift up the mood. This book is dark, is it not? If you've been watching the whole time, hey, I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Because I'm basically nobody, and to think that you're hanging out with me in the kitchen like this is pretty darn cool. I wonder what this would do to it. I get a little crazy here with some spices. A little bit of, that's the wrong one though. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Bit of smoked paprika. Just a hair. There it is. I think now's a good time we're going to throw up our, or add in our thyme. Get it? Now's a good time to add in our thyme. Boy, this book is a lot to process, isn't it? There's a lot going on. I'm trying to picture what it would be like even to be a keeper, which I've worked as a keeper for one day in my life, and that was plenty. I was not about that. Um, but to be a keeper in times of war, like literally, World War II is going on, and your job is to do what you said you were going to do, which is keep these animals happy and alive and cared for, and to the best of your ability. How do you do that when the world is falling apart all around you? That's commitment on like another level. And from my experience, generally speaking, keepers are committed. They're folks that mean what they say and say what they mean. They're not going to mess around. Great. All right, we'll let that do its thing. Where were we? Okay, just backpedaling here. Where were we? Doing something will make you feel better. Yes. She had always abided by the saying, and it had helped her to cope with dark times in her life. So she and the remaining zoo staff set about making order out of the chaos. As they cleaned things up, they found the corpse of 82 people amidst the rubble. Like the dead animals before them, the bodies were buried in mass graves. Only 91 animals had survived the war. These included a reindeer, a rare oriental stork from Japan, a shoebill, which is a bird about the size of a crane. Shoebills are really freaking cool. They're one of my favorites. With gray feathers and a clog-shaped beak, whose natural habitat is the swamps of the Nile. Well, beyond the Nile, too. The male elephant, Siam. Oh, good, Siam made it. A young hippo. In the final days of the war, bombs had destroyed the hippo house and wounded the hippo's mother so severely that she died. The zookeepers poured water on the young hippo many times a day to keep her skin from drying out. Several other animals disappeared soon after, slaughtered by hungry Berliners. The rest of the animals were placed in temporary enclosures, the shoebill in one of the few undamaged bathrooms. After Heck's disappearance, the zoo lacked a director. The former managing director, Hans Amann, had tried to take over, but once a former zoo chauffeur revealed Amin to be a Nazi party member, he was forced to leave. While the chauffeur was installed as head of the zoo's cleanup efforts by the Soviets, he brought together 200 rebel women, and by July 1st, 1945, some semblance of a restored zoo could be opened. Wow, that's fast. A few weeks later, yet another man turned up, a former part-time waiter in the zoo's restaurant, who claimed to have been put in charge of running the zoo. Since neither the telephone nor mail systems were operational, no one could confirm or deny this. The bickering between the two directors resounded through the zoo for weeks. Still, they agreed on one thing. They sent Katrina to work with the rebel woman, where the most she was allowed to do was make a couple of signs for the animals' enclosures. I've encountered this so often in my career. Putting people that are obviously talented and should be in a position of responsibility and assigning them to menial tasks and just wasting their time. While this rebuild was underway, the governments of the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France formally assumed joint control of Germany, dividing the country into 4 semi-autonomous occupation zones. Berlin, located deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split into 4, with one sector given to each Allied power to administer. The Berlin Zoo suddenly found itself under nominal British control. So in comes the khaki, is all I can say. In comes the khaki, in comes the pith helmets, and in comes some 60 or 70 years of BBC-dominated wildlife filmmaking. Cheers. When the occupying forces got wind of the leadership chaos at the zoo, they changed the newly established magistrate of Greater Berlin, the city's highest administrative authority, tasked with overseeing all 4 sectors, with clearing up the matter once and for all. Shortly thereafter, Katrina received a written request from the magistrate to appear at the old city hall on August 3rd. The request did not specify why. Ooh, is she going to get put in charge of the zoo? I'm really hoping for it. Werner, I love names like this. Werner Schroeder had also received a letter from the magistrate, and on the morning of August 3rd, he started out the 5-mile walk from his apartment into the district of Wilhelmsdorf to the city center. He was to report to the public education department. He, too, was left in the dark as to why. Werner had come in contact with Oscar while he was studying zoology in Berlin's Friedrich Wilhelm University in the 1930s. Let me just back up this guy here. There you go. Beautiful. In the 1930s, but did not know Katrina. They met for the first time that day when Joseph Naas, head of the magistrate's cultural bureau, informed them that Heinrich would serve as the interim head of the zoo, and Werner as the managing director and her deputy. Yes, she's put in charge of the zoo. Sweet! Heinrich was well aware that she had been given this opportunity only because of the unusual circumstances of this moment in history. There were not enough politically untainted men to fill the country's vacant positions. She'd later joked to friends, "They surely thought I was Oscar when they asked me to come to City Hall." And so Heinrich and Schroeder, who were politically above reproach, set about rebuilding the zoo. Because the boundary walls had been smashed, the street traffic ran right through the grounds. Oh, that's crazy. During the night, gangs came to plunder what they could. The zookeepers attempted to drive them away with whistles, but a silver fox, a wild boar, and a deer fell victim nonetheless. In late September, Heinrich was appointed to the zoo's permanent director. And a good month later, the Allied powers officially recognized the institution's cultural value, guaranteeing public financing, which kept the zoo afloat, albeit barely. During the first year following the war, there was hardly any reconstruction. The sewer system and the electricity supply had to be put into operation again, and there was little food for the animals. Vegetables were planted on the fallow lands, as was tobacco. Cigarettes were an indispensable currency. Heinrich had signs made to guide visitors through the muddle of half-destroyed cages and enclosures to find the ones in which animals were still alive. One day she caught a thief trying to make off with the wooden planks from a wrecked table. She confronted him and snapped, As a zoo shareholder, I have every right to do this. Ooh, this, yeah, well, you still hear stuff like that today. I have a right to put my child over the exhibit boundary so they can see the gorilla a little bit closer. In January 1946, the Associated Press would write, only about 200 animals still live in the dreary ruins of this once colorful and beloved institution. Even so, things were much less dire than they had been in the previous year. There was no money to purchase new animals, but several hundred Berliners had brought their pets to the zoo, especially their parrots, thinking they could get better care than they had at home. A giraffe nicknamed Reich, who'd been evacuated to Vienna, was returned to Berlin, and the staff chipped in a month's salary to acquire at least a few new species. Heinrich used the money to buy penguins. She also offered a consultation hour for worried pet owners, hoping to find out why their parrot was plucking out its feathers or why their dog disobeyed them. So a couple thoughts as I stir my sauce back here. Just putting them together in an orderly fashion here. Pull that back up so I can stew on this. First off, the idea of staff donating a month's wages to try to benefit the zoo is cool. That's something that, I mean, you probably won't see in high demand or high regard anymore because, you know, times are different. But I'm sure keepers would consider it, and I know inexperienced keepers to be very dedicated to the animals in their charge and willing to bend over backwards to make their lives more comfortable. Definitely. But one thing to consider here is the era this zoo is existing in, the 1940s, right? They were donating money so the zoo could purchase more species of animals. I think that's very appropriate to that era. The first zoo I worked at was a really tiny zoo in the Central Valley of California. And it has such a lot of heart and a lot of ambition. But it was a zoo going through changes because the zoo was opened in the 1950s. A man basically was trying to memorialize his wife, so he built a zoo to honor her, as you do. And in those days, the zoo had a lot of animals all over the place, many different species. I never saw this, but my parents said they remembered going to the zoo as kids and seeing like a lion and polar bears and a gorilla, all kinds of crazy stuff that didn't belong at that zoo. Because the zoo altogether is 5 acres. And the exhibit space total, like the zoo part people walk through, was like 3 acres. So it's a tiny, tiny place. And they had big, serious animals in that space. But in that day and age, I think the goal was always put as much as you can in here. The more you can wow people with crazy animals, the more money you might be able to make. That's what people want to see. And that's very much of that era, because today what you're seeing is almost the opposite. You're seeing zoos saying, all right, let's do less with more. Let's commit ourselves to maybe doing a lot poorly is a bad idea. Maybe doing more with less is a prudent idea. So the zoo I started at scaled way back, and they focus on Madagascar now and Brazil. They have a wonderful family of golden lion tamarins. And that works for them because we're talking about a primate that's this tall. You can do that comfortably in 3 acres of space, in addition to several other species they have today. But they no longer have lions. They no longer have polar bears. I remember as a kid going to that zoo and seeing sea lions. They had a tank with sea lions. That kind of stuff isn't there anymore. And arguably you're seeing that at most major institutions across the United States. I can't speak as much for private zoos because private zoos really can do a lot more of whatever they want. Public zoos that are owned in some capacity by municipalities, like the one that I started at was a county park and county-run zoo, right? Have to follow a different set of guidelines usually. But that's a very complicated topic. And maybe you know more about it and throw a comment in, let me know. I see in the live streaming of this particular episode, not a lot going on there. I don't think anybody knows that I'm streaming right now, but whatever. I'm happy to talk, happy to keep myself busy. It's a rainy, cold day. I've got nothing else to do. Might as well make this weird bolognese sauce. Although this is going to be really friggin' good when this is done. Holy cow. Wild boar, elk, all local produce inside of it aside from the tomatoes. Cooked like this for several hours. Oh, it's just flavor's going to melt together. It's going to be a delicious bowl full of warmth on a cold, rainy night. I'm going to serve this with polenta. And I like to add a lot of cheese into my polenta and bake it. So I'll put that in a bowl, this right on top of it, a little bit of grated Parmesan or Reggiano or something like that. Oh, it should be a meal that warms you right up. Cooking is fun. I think I'd like to see a world where more people take time to cook. And I know that we live in a world where there's a lot of demand for your attention all the time. But I'm curious if this whole push now toward COVID friendly, which means staying at home a lot, particularly for workers who are now moving en masse to beautiful montane regions and doing all their work from home. I'm curious if you're going to see a resurgence of cooking, because really since the time of this story, since the 1940s and 50s, the world has become a lot more convenient. You know, there's a great irony to me in the idea of calling food organic, simply because even in the 1940s and 50s, that phrase really didn't mean a whole lot, because that's just kind of the way food was. We were right at the beginning of when mass chemicals were coming out to really speed up agriculture and speed up what you had. Many families still kept a garden at home. You know, in England, for example, during the war, victory garden was all the rage. That's just what people did. I remember my grandmother telling me that for Thanksgiving coming up here, she would say that on Thanksgiving morning, her dad would load her up in the car and they would drive. And mind you, they lived in a city, not in the country. They would drive down to a ranch on the edge of town that had turkeys. They would select a live turkey, take it home, which again, they lived in town. They would have to kill the turkey, pluck all the feathers, gut it, do the whole 9 yards, and then cook that turkey. And the quality of that animal is so much more. She saw directly where that food was coming from. She understood entirely that this was a life that was being taken in order for the family to come together to share a meal. I didn't have to do that with this meat. I went to a butcher's to get the meat. I saw in the back animal carcasses being worked on and meat taken from them. But I didn't have to do any of that work. This meat was easy to come by. So I'm curious if we're going to see a trend going to what I'll just call for now the slow movement. Instead of everything at your fingertips, convenient and ready when you want it, food tastes so much better when you take your time and make it. Gordon Ramsay's, this has been his whole thing for his whole career. Make it from fresh, never frozen, right? In the freezer, we've got ice, whiskey, gin. Well, I'm sure we have something else in here. Ice, whiskey, some ice cream, right? That's about it. Cooking from fresh makes more sense. It tastes better, and it's better for you in a lot of ways. I want to just quickly pull up the cover of this book so you guys can all see it. Okay, put that there. We're going to try this one more time. Give me 2 seconds here. I appreciate the patience. There we go. Throw that in. Come back up. Bam. Okay, now we're going to go down here. Delete that because we don't need it anymore. Yes, get rid of it. Now we're going to go here. Bam. Uh-oh, we're going to do it. Here we go. Ready? Bam, bam. Bam. Done. Yes. Go. set. Here it comes. 3, 2, ka-cha. There it is, right there. Well, it's there for you. It's not there for me. It's digital. Zookeepers War. I'm finding this actually to be a pretty compelling read. I like books like this that are about wildlife but written more in the story format because they help me better dive into it mentally and kind of understand what's going on. Zookeepers War. Where were we? Basically, so I'm just trying to read through the first chapter. If you're wondering what, oh, okay, I was going to say, where is it? If you're wondering what the method to the madness is here, I'm just trying to get to chapter 2, and we're coming up on it now. We're several pages shy. So that's the goal. Basically, just read to chapter 2, and then probably jump off the live stream and get ready to post it to YouTube. So that's the plan. In late August 1947, the zoo was again rocked by explosions. British troops were trying to blast apart the nearby air raid shelter. All 649 animals had to be lured into wooden crates, one after the well, that's a misprint, one after another, or the other, but they put one after the after, and brought out of the zoo. But the bunker was too massive. Despite the 20 tons of explosive detonated, the attempt would have to be repeated the following year. By then, explosions were a minor concern compared to the new problems facing the zoo. The blockade of West Berlin, which lasted almost a full year, posed entirely new problems for the zoo. The occupying forces had been arguing for years about creating a unified German currency, and now, in June 1948, the three Western powers announced that they would be introducing the new Deutschmark in their sectors of Berlin. The Soviets, who had not been consulted on this move, reacted promptly. On the night of June 23, 1948, the lights went out in the western part of the city, the electricity supply was switched off, and all the streets and waterways were closed by the Red Army. The island of West Berlin, which depended on supplies from the outside world, was cut off from that world except by air. The Allies used an airlift to supply food to the 2 million residents. The zoo was expected to do its part to save the city from starvation. The new British commander informed Katrina that of what had to be done. Fell all the trees, plant spinach on the open spaces, get rid of all the animals, and set up the chicken coops instead. Heinrich was shocked, and she pictured the grand oaks falling, some of them 400 years old. The zoo would have to close down, and she knew that once a zoo had been closed, it was almost impossible to reopen it. She was painfully aware of what had happened in Dusseldorf, where the zoological garden, founded in 1876, was closed on what was supposed to be a temporary basis during World War II and hadn't opened its gates again. She wanted to spare her zoo, Oscar's zoo, from that same fate. Heinrich resisted the order. She tried to stall, filing complaints at the headquarters of the British forces and at the Berlin Bureau for Open Space Planning. The commander relented and again visited Heinrich at the zoo. This time he brought a map with trees sketched in. He asked her to mark the trees that absolutely had to be preserved. A major portion had been damaged in the war, with many treetops lopped off. But Katrina marked every tree, without exception. The commander threatened her with legal action, but Heinrich stood her ground. She argued with a whole host of characters over She had argued with a whole host of characters over the years. Sometime later, she received a visit from another British officer from headquarters. Forget about that business with the trees, was all he said. In the end, not a single tree was felled. Good for her. By May of 1949, the American, British, and French occupation zones became a sovereign state, the Federal Republic of Germany. West Berlin became a de facto part of this new country, although the Soviet Union would continue to dispute the city's status for decades. 5 months later, in October of 1949, the former Soviet zone was rechristened the German Democratic Republic. East Berlin became the capital of the new socialist state. The Berlin Zoo kept its gates open throughout this upheaval. During the blockade, Berliners had fed the hippo, their favorite animal, heads of cabbage, which they had scrimped and saved for. Now the new resident of West Germany would be getting a lady visitor from the East. After the war, hippos were rare in European zoos. Katrina and Leipzig zoo director Karl Marx Schneider had two females, Greta and Olga. Schneider and Heinrich had both been trading animals back and forth for quite some time, undeterred by the fact that their zoos were in two different, increasingly hostile countries. They were not about to be stopped by political borders. After all, far more was at stake, the survival of a species. And so they set the animals on their honeymoons. So that's one thing that I often question about zoos, is that they're arguing for the survival of species and trying to contribute to what they call conservation. But my fundamental point about zoos, I think, will always be, quite simply put, that zoos are a wonderful source of entertainment, but don't participate in conservation in the way that they've explained to you that they have. And I know anybody watching, if you come from a zoo background, are going to get really upset with me, but I think about it logically. You can look up the tax records for nearly every major public zoo, and what you'll find is that the funds donated to conservation are generally minuscule in comparison to what they're bringing in as a gross revenue, as a net revenue. And then, of course, they have to pay for all their overhead and expenditures and staff and feed, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my basic point is that it's challenging to find a zoo that's funding conservation in a meaningful way. Because you could spend $3 million on a beautiful enclosure for a set of African lions, or have just donated that $3 million to conservation efforts in the field where these lions are actually living. Well, African lions are currently vulnerable in the wild with a population of, let's just round it off at 30,000-ish. Probably some more, maybe some more, who knows. But the biggest thing that we've got to work about with really a lot of Africa's wildlife is increasing the amount of space that they have access to, right? Because closing them down into small game reserves isn't a good idea. Open borders, large scale, makes far more sense. But when you do that, you also bump into the issue of people living in rural communities have to be able to safely live with these animals and make a living in a sustainable way that is going to benefit them. Because if you don't get community buy-in, it's an uphill battle all the way to make conservation a case that people buy into. Turn the heat down on this guy now. That's really what I'd like to get involved with, is working with rural communities and conservation. It's a dream. I feel stuck in California right now. My dream is to be in Africa and live there and work there full time and have a stable gig where I can be in the bush, be in the wild, benefiting wildlife, benefiting people, making, for selfish reasons, myself feel like that I'm making a difference in the world. Because I'm not content to live my life and then disappear. And I guess my larger point here is that people like Katrina were doing that in their own way. They felt that what they were doing at that moment in time was important. And sure, it is. You know, her position is very important. And I think she's very deserving of being remembered for the actions she took. Because it starts at home. This is why I think zoos are a necessary thing. They should happen. They're a good thing. A zoo's job is to get people excited about wildlife, not to promote that they're benefiting conservation. A zoo's job is to bring people through the gates, expose them to thematic wildlife experiences, and really instill, and this is where I don't think the mission's being accomplished as great as it could be, instill a set of values that encourages these people to go forth and experience the wild. It's happened in Europe because I've noticed Europeans travel to wild areas far more than the general population of the United States and Canada. So that's another project I'd be keen to look at. What is the difference between European zoos and American zoos? Where is that disconnect happening? Is it simply put that Europe is closer to Africa? It's a 10, I mean, well, if you're going all the way to South Africa, it's like a 10-hour flight. Um, is the ease of access why they find it more worth their time to go? Um, Especially young Europeans, you know, early 20s, gap year kind of trip. Anyway, I'm well off the point. Back to it. Where were we? The females, or hippos again, Greta and Olga, took several trips on a freight train to West Berlin, where they briefly were housed in a hippo house that had been patched together. Ooh, that's super sketchy. The British soldiers called the building a pissoir, but it did the job. Oh, pisser, but it did the job. I've never seen pisser written. So okay, there you go. The ownership of the hippo's offspring followed a time-honored farmer tradition. The female goes to visit the male, and the first male issues becomes the property of the female's owner. Let me read that again because I didn't understand it. The ownership of the hippo's offspring, okay, followed a time-honored farmer tradition. The female goes to visit the male, and the first male issue becomes the property of the female's owner. Okay, I get it now. Meanwhile, managing director Werner Schroeder was trying to come to grips with the Berlin Zoo's dire financial situation. The zoo was barely bringing in enough money to pay the keepers and cover the costs of feeding the animals. Somehow or another, he would have to entice more people to visit. Schroeder had always been a big fan of boxing. Uh-oh, where are we going with this? As a student, he had even twice been German champion. He decided to organize boxing and wrestling matches in a small arena on zoo premises. He had also set up animal fairs and was able to sign on 2 circuses, okay, Astra and Bush Eros, to perform performances on an open area near the Antelope House. He thought of that's a lot of psychology going on there. He thought of arranging an Oktoberfest too. There you go, that's more fun. Katrina Heinrich was overwhelmed by that idea. What about all the animals, she asked. They definitely won't be able to cope with the noise and commotion. I like where her head's at. Schroeder worried about that as well, but knew the zoo's losses, and they were alarming. We're up to our necks in trouble, he said. The dark circles under his eyes accentuated his anxious look. We have to try this. Berliners were a bit perplexed when they saw the zoo's new promotional posters, which featured 2 grinning hippos toasting each other with beer steins. Each sported a gingerbread heart around its neck, one saying Gretchen and the other saying Knackst, which I totally butchered. Moving on. Above them, cursive script announced Oktoberfest in the zoo. There would be shooting galleries and carousels with reindeer, parrots, and bears. As it turned out, any misgivings were unfolded. The festival was a roaring success. More than 500,000 visitors came in the first 4 weeks, providing the zoo substantial revenue that assured its survival. Contrary to Heinrich's fears, the animals barely noticed all the commotion. That's something I've got a bit of experience with. That first zoo I worked at, I can't remember what the event was. I think it was a Halloween event where people came in costume. And I remember there's a mascot from the local town's baseball team, excuse me. Big, goofy looking thing, kind of like Elmo, with like a big nose that honked. And every time this thing walked past the spider monkey house, the monkeys flipped out. They hated it. It was just completely upsetting and alarming to them. So I totally get where she's coming from. I mean, that kind of activity could really cause issue for the wildlife in the zoo. Yeah, just piecing it together. On another hand, this is something that zoos are still doing. You can travel to zoos all across the country here in the States, and they do their own version of like a Halloween or Oktoberfest type activity. Various names. I think the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo does a thing called Boo at the Zoo. Cute title. So yeah, I mean, the idea of people going to the zoo and doing something beyond simply looking at the animals is totally hip, and I think more zoos should consider this approach, simply because let's just estimate a family goes to the zoo once a year, maybe, if that, maybe once every other year. that's a lot of time that you're not getting them to come back, because basically they're like, I've seen it, I've done it, I don't need to go. And then some people, of course, ramp that way up. You have annual pass holders who are there almost every weekend. Um, but creating those events, I think, are important. And I've always been a big fan of trying to create events surrounding people in my age group, the 20s, because I think we're young enough and flexible enough of mind to consider new ideas, new conservation practices, and new sustainability practices. And what better venue to introduce them to this than at a zoo? The California Academy of Science in San Francisco, which is some 50 miles from where I am right now, in the pre-COVID days, did a thing called Nightlife, which is kind of like very reminiscent. Basically, you would go to the museum at night, and it was all for adults only. You could get a drink, like wander the aquarium underground with like beer and wine, and have all your friends there, and you're looking at weird animals and listening to presenters talking about a whole variety of subjects. You can go up above ground and get really fun tapas made with, fun drinks pairing with it. It was a really cool way to see the aquarium in a different way, and it kept people coming back, because I think they did that every Thursday night. I hope they bring that back after this COVID deal has kind of run its course and the world can resume whatever pace we had before. I, in the pre-COVID days, organized bar trivias, which I'm trying to do on mammals. I could do it live. I just need to know that I'm going to have an audience, because that's not a thing I could do by myself. So if you're watching, even if this isn't a live broadcast and you just heard that idea and it's something you would be up for, drop a comment or shoot me a direct message so I know, because I want to set up an online virtual wildlife bar trivia night where each of us at our home, so we're already home and cozy and comfortable, have a fun drink and we're hanging out virtually and can play bar trivia together. I'll organize the host side of it. I've got an online game, so physically you can play with your phone. So we get nerdy about wildlife, learn a few new things, have a few laughs, have some drinks. Kind of nobody gets hurt, we're all at home. Well, unless you drink too much at home, what's the worst that could happen? Just don't go out for Taco Bell afterwards. All right, that's looking good. Where were we? Even the two advertising icons were unimpressed, but they had other reasons to be excited. In May of 1950, a male hippo named Schwabel was born. He went to Leipzig, as stipulated. 2 years later came a female, Billet, who could eventually become a new partner for the male that had been at the Berlin Zoo. The incestuous nature of this union was beside the point. Hippos were rare and drew large crowds. It made no sense to be too picky. That's actually pretty important to point out. A lot of zoo wildlife has sketchy genetics. Just going to leave that out there. And if you don't believe me, go to the zoo, look at the animal, bring your phone, right? Google wild lion, right? Look at the lion, hold it up, look at what you're actually looking at. They're not the same. And you can do that for any species. Young hippos were not the only new attractions during this time. By 1951, there had been no elephants for 4 years, ever since the old male Siam, the only elephant to survive the wartime bombings, had died in 1947. Heinrich was convinced that a zoo without elephants could not be a real zoo, but she lacked the funding to buy a new one. At some point, she read in the newspaper that India's head of state had made a gift of a young elephant to a foreign zoo. She lost no time in establishing contact with the broadcasting service in the American sector, which ran a program for local schools. I'm going to make some more tea. Where were we? She hoped her request would have a greater chance of success if it came from the children of Berlin. Heinrich's plan worked, and soon a young female elephant, there it is, was located. There you go. There was no longer an elephant house, so at first the elephant lived in the so-called equid house, a thatched, half-timbered building next to the horses and zebras, which technically zebra is pronounced zebra, but we're not going to get into that right now. But something was wrong. When she was let out onto the enclosure every morning, she was so exhausted that she threw herself down in the sand and slept for hours. This was not how Heinrich had pictured her. After all, people don't come to the zoo to see an elephant lie around all day. Oh, so I can say this as a nature guide, as somebody who makes his living taking people to see wildlife and photograph wildlife and be around wildlife. Morning and evening, that's when you want to go. That's when animals are doing their thing and they're most active. Throughout the majority of the middle part of the day, they don't do anything. They're just sort of hanging out, enjoying life. They operate on the Spanish siesta system. They're not, I mean, if you don't have to get up and move in the hot part of the day, why would you, right? Morning and evening, that's when you're out. And every zoo faces that same issue. Their open hours are the only time of day when the animals aren't doing anything. Because animals tend to get up in the evening, they remain pretty active all through the night, and then at sunrise, they're doing the last of their stuff before it's time to go to bed. You know, think about zebras, elephants, impalas, any of the antelopes, whole of the African plain. Those animals have to be awake at night, because guess who else is awake at night? Lions, leopards, wild dogs, hyenas. And at that point, you've got the spotted, the brown, aardwolf maybe. You've got to be alert all the time because predators are around and they're going for you and trying to eat you. So you need to be active. Whereas monkeys might go up into trees and rest for the night. Plains game is active all night long. So just think a little bit next time you're at the zoo. Why is this animal not doing anything? Well, it's the middle of the day. At some point, Heinrich recalled a photo she had received from Mumbai. Wasn't Shanti chained up in that picture? Shanti's the elephant. Heinrich was relieved to find that, yes, two of the elephant's feet had indeed been chained to a tree. No sooner was Shanti chained up in the equid house than she slept through the night and romped about during the day. Huh. So the elephant's conditioned to it, but wow. Thinking about that. The elephant was conditioned to being chained up. So they chained her up at night so she could sleep. It's not the way it should be. But Katrina had no choice. Now that the zoo's finances were relatively stable, Werner Schroeder was able to devote himself to a project he'd cared about for years, rebuilding the demolished aquarium. Schroeder's great passion was for everything that crept and swam. As a little boy, he'd caught frogs, newts, bugs, and fish with the Willendorf's fen and kept them in preserving jars at home. His mother patiently observed her son's interests, but his father attempted to get this obsession with critters, as he called his son's hobby, out of his system and dragged him to imperial military parades. His efforts were unsuccessful. As a student, Schroeder had visited the aquarium frequently, bringing reptiles from his travels in Greece and North Africa. After the war, he often spent time, when the workday was through, standing in the dilapidated structure in which trees were now growing and gazing into the evening sky. In September of 1952, after 2 years of construction, the Berlin Aquarium reopened as the home to 1,000 animals, purchases made possible in part by the annual Oktoberfest, which continued to enjoy great success. Over the next 25 years, it would be Schroeder's mission in life to bring new glory to the aquarium, making it one of the most important institutions of its kind in Europe. While Schroeder was rebuilding the aquarium, a new elephant house, the zoo's first building since the war's end, was approved for construction. Heinrich had, until then, worked primarily on repairs, such as the historic Antelope House, and on simple stopgap solutions. Sensing that her critics were waiting for her to slip up on its first major undertaking, she showed the plans to the Elephant House to Karl Marx Schreider, for her friend and colleague in Leipzig, who found no problems with them. The Elephant House opened in 1954 after 2 years of construction. In addition to Shanti and 2 other elephants, the long building with a high glass facade and green tiled interior welcomed the zoo's first rhinoceros in 11 years, along with a tapir and a sloth. Fascinating. We're going to probably call it there, because it's been a hell of a long time now. I think I've been streaming for 2 hours or so, which is pretty good. And if you've watched this whole video on YouTube, what's the matter with you? Didn't you have anything better to do with your evening? Let's face it, you're probably in bed right now, late at night, can't sleep, so you're just scrolling through YouTube. Somehow or another, you landed on this channel, and now you're watching this for whatever reason. I encourage you, jump over to Mammals. If by some weird chance you thought this was fun, jump over to Mammals. Saturday nights, we do a live show called Misguided. Time keeps changing. It was at 5, now we're doing it at 7 p.m. And we jump into all kinds of conservation issues on that show. Coming up soon, we're going to start having featured guests from all around the conservation world. And the beauty of it, it's live. You can participate in the comment bar and directly interact with us as the hosts and our guests and ask questions, get involved, gather more data on specific things that you want to know more about. So I'll highly encourage you, check out the show Misguided. It only streams on Mammals, which is really the first social media platform dedicated to nature content in any variety. If you're a wildlife filmmaker, if you are a hobbyist who takes photos, if you just like going on hikes, Mammals is the place for you. And if casually you just want to follow along and check out somebody's stream, be it hiking, underwater swimming with, I don't know, snorkeling in Hawaii, or, hey, some dude in his kitchen you've never met before reading a book about Nazis and Germany and the zoo in the 1940s while making Bolognese in the back. That's the platform for you. There's a little bit of something for everybody. If you're already on Mammals and you're watching this, thanks. I appreciate the view. Throw me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Maybe there's a recipe you want to see me try, or a book I should try, or maybe you hated all of this, in which case, never watch the show again. Probably not going to work out. But at any rate, guys, thanks for playing.